Good evening, friends. How are we doing? Um, Tonight might be the most ambitious class I've ever attempted. Among the things that we will discuss are proof of the Exodus, why it is that there are no records of the plagues and the Exodus, clarify some light on the story of Joseph, bring archaeological proof for the Exodus, and lots of other things. We are going to be very, very busy. So hold tight. Now, a lot of this is going to have to be done through screen sharing, so I apologize, but we're going to do a lot of screen sharing. And let's talk about where the Jews lived in Egypt. And we're going to start this discussion because it's very, very important for us to understand the story of the Exodus in large measure, and it's also a good lead into a number of other subjects. So the Torah tells us that Pharaoh said to the sons, the brothers of Joseph, "The land of Egypt is open before you. Settle your father and your brothers in the best part of the land. Let them stay in the region of Goshen." The Jews lived in Goshen. What was Goshen like? Well, let's start with a movie depiction of Goshen. Why is it paused? My screen sharing is paused. Weird. Can you, Bob, give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down? Can you see? I'm not sure that. That's terrible. Okay, we're not going to do that then. We'll skip that. Okay, the bottom line is, I wanted to show you a clip from Exodus, Gods and Kings, but it won't allow me. But generally speaking, Cecil B. DeMille, or whether it's Ridley Scott, whoever put the movie together, right? The Jews lived in like a city. They lived in a city somewhere. The reality is that that's not the case. The reality is that the Jews lived in pasture land, which makes sense. They had to settle in pasture land because they had a great deal of pasture. They had a great deal of animals. So they had to live in pasture land. Now, where was this pasture land? It was called Eretz Goshen. Let's just take a look at another source for the same thing. Joseph says to his brothers, after he reveals himself to them and says, "Go get dad and come back to Egypt," he says, let me make this larger. There we go. "You will dwell in the region of Goshen, where you will be near me, you and your children and your grandchildren, your flocks and herds, and all that is yours." You're going to live in Goshen and you're going to be near Joseph. Now, what does near mean? So the simple assumption is, right, that near means, I don't know, a couple of blocks away. The reality is that because shepherds were an abomination to the Egyptians, that's why the Jews had to be in the land of Goshen. Wherever Joseph was living was not Goshen. Let's take a look at where Joseph was living. Now, in order to understand where Joseph was living, we're going to have to understand a fair amount about some of the history involved. But let's take a look first at this map. So on this map here, this is the land of Goshen. You see this? You see this dotted line here? This area is the land of Goshen. Sorry, like around here. Okay, I think I have a better map for you. Hold on, here we go. Yeah, I do. Hold on. Sorry. So the land of Goshen would be right around here. It's a very fertile area, and this is really you can see it says Goshen here. The Jews lived over here in Goshen in this area. Why is that important? Because you'll see that, you see Zoan? Zoan is a biblical name for the city of Tanis. The city of Tanis is really the seat of the pharaohs of the Exodus. But that's not where Joseph lived either. Joseph lived somewhat south of there. And again, let's go to our other map for a second. He lived in Avaris. I'm going to tell you how I know he lived in Avaris. Remember that Joseph is part of the royal court. The question is, whose royal court was he part of? And in understanding that, we are remarkably going to be able to, I believe, nail down proof for the Exodus. Big claim. Here we go. Before we go any further, I just want to again emphasize the Jews did not live in a city. They lived in a region. That region had to be outside the city because the city that Joseph lived in was an Egyptian city. Egyptians didn't like anybody who herded sheep. They didn't like shepherds, right? So they had to live somewhere else. They lived in the land of Goshen. At the time of the Exodus, interestingly, you see clear proof that they all didn't live in the same place. The Jews actually lived in a number of different areas within Goshen. The Israelites journeyed from Ramses to Sukkot. Okay, they journeyed from Ramses to Sukkot. Let's see what places we are talking about. Here is Sukkot. Okay. Why did they have to travel from Ramses to Sukkot? Or I should say, why did they gather in Ramses? Right? They traveled from Ramses to Sukkot. What were they doing in Ramses? Ramses, which is technically in the land of Goshen. The reason why they were in Ramses is, if you take a close look, if you're going to gather everybody together in order to leave, you want to do it right by a river. So what they did was they gathered everybody together. There were Jews who were living, again, I'm not going to get into all the proofs of it, but there were Jews who were living in this area, Israelites, I should say, Israelites living in this area. They were living in multiple areas. There were also some Israelites who were working in the mines in Sinai, not for today. Okay, so they traveled from Ramses to Sukkot on their way out. They gathered in Ramses. Why? Because they lived in a bunch of different places, but they certainly didn't live in a city. Now, right, they lived in pasture land. Now, at the time of the Exodus itself, I'm going to point this out. We're going to come back to it later. I just want to point out something interesting. Well, we know there were 10 plagues, and we know that, God took us out. Note this verse. For that night I will go through the land of Egypt and strike down every firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. And I will mete out punishment to all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. Sorry, larger. We're going to make that, what did I do? Lost it. Okay, but God's going to, somehow or other, he's going to settle the score with the gods of Egypt. It's not so clear exactly how that happened. Right, so there are commentaries who say that the gods of Egypt here refers to the leaders of Egypt, whatever the case may be. Hold that in abeyance. Let's talk about the Exodus itself, and actually the slavery. Let's start with the slavery. Vayakam Melech, larger, hold on. A new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. Okay, so if you want to understand the history here, the first thing you're looking for is a king that didn't know Joseph. Now, there are two explanations in Rashi. One says that he really didn't know Joseph, and the other says that he just chose to forget Joseph. We're going to go with the literal interpretation. He didn't know Joseph. How could there have been a king who didn't know Joseph? So let's talk about who was ruling Egypt at the time of Joseph. And in doing this, we're actually going to understand the Joseph story considerably more clearly. Okay. Sorry, Winston Churchill, you're out. The rulers at the time of Joseph, I'm going to argue to you, were the Hyksos. The Hyksos entered the land of Egypt. They actually were of Palestinian origin. The Hyksos of Palestinian origin took over in Egypt. They ruled there for over 100 years. We'll see some of the dates later. These are the rulers at the time of Joseph. Besides the fact that I'll show you proof of that later from the dates that are involved, what's really significant about that is, you have to wonder how Joseph just sort of blended into the local society so easily. Right? The brothers didn't recognize him. He fit right in. Well, how did he fit right in? From, those who were living in Palestine and the Egyptians, they're not exactly the same stock. As a matter of fact, we know that from Egyptian tomb paintings, that they depicted people from Palestine different than the native Egyptians because they looked different. It's kind of strange, you must admit, that Pharaoh all of a sudden says, "Oh, Joseph, we're going to put you in charge." All of a sudden, some kid from some foreign land, and you put him in charge as the prime minister? Unless, of course, the rulers at that time were from Palestine, in which case Joseph fit right in. like a glove, fit right into the society there. And it also makes sense that they would promote one of their own. It does not make sense that the Egyptians would promote somebody from outside Egypt to prime minister. It's just very, very strange. Right? Whenever you read the story, you have to wonder a little bit, like, what's with this Pharaoh? What, are you out of your mind? All of a sudden, you're putting Joseph in charge. This kid from, I understand he can interpret dreams, but he's a foreigner. You know, like a foreigner prime minister. I mean, you imagine in England, all of a sudden, the prime minister was from France. Doesn't work. But the reality is that the Hyksos were the rulers at the time of Joseph. The Hyksos dynasty ends, and the 18th and 19th dynasty of Egypt begin. The Hyksos basically leave. Either they got kicked out or they leave. Either way. Let's talk a little bit more about Hyksos, because it's very, very interesting. So the pharaohs at the time of Joseph were Hyksos. They were Palestinian, basically. Palestinian, Asia Minor. So the Hyksos were, so Joseph fit right in with the Hyksos. When the Hyksos reign ends, Joseph is forgotten. Why? Because he was a Hyksos, and the Egyptians weren't going to remember him. And interestingly, you'll note this highlight here, which I took out of Wikipedia. In the following centuries, the Egyptians would portray the Hyksos as bloodthirsty and oppressive foreign rulers. Let's take a look at Exodus 1. Let's take a look for a second at Exodus 1 again. A new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph, and he said to his people, look, the Israelite people are much too numerous for us. Let us deal shrewdly with them so they may not increase. Otherwise, in the event of war, they may join our enemies in fighting against us and rise from the ground. Okay. Seems like paranoia. Why would you think that the Hebrews are going to somehow or other, when invaders come, the Hebrews are going to join them? Well, if they're both from Canaan and they're both from the same place, if the Hyksos come back, the Egyptians are worried that they have a fifth column. So again, the important fact here is Joseph ruled during the time that the Hyksos ruled. When the Hyksos rule ends, we're going to see that the enslavement begins. Okay. Let's deal with some dates. The kings of the 18th and 19th dynasty, there were some very, very famous kings there. You can see Akhenaten, who was very famous for his religious reforms. You can see Tutankhamun. This was the golden age of Egypt, which, by the way, I'm going to submit to you, is also while the Jews are there enslaved. Okay. Now, you see these years down at the end, 1319, etc. We're going to come back to those years momentarily. But this is the 19th and 18th dynasty. Okay. Let's do some math. We're going to do some math now. Not to worry. You don't have to do it in your head. The Hyksos reign. Let's see if we can make this larger and larger. The Hyksos reign started in approximately, again, when you're dealing with Egyptian dates, there's a little bit of play always. It started in 1640. It ended, these are all BCE. It ended in 1523. Okay, I just did some math there. Hold on, let me get this in. 1313. Now, how long were the Jews enslaved in Egypt? They were enslaved in Egypt for 210 years. We're going to look at this in a little bit more in depth shortly. But according to the rabbis, they were enslaved in Egypt for 210 years, which means they would leave Egypt at about 1313, according to this calculation. But it gets more interesting. We are currently, you see this term LBH, that's Libriat HaOlam. When we count Jewish years, we're currently in 5781, Libriat HaOlam, from the creation of the world. The Revelation, and therefore the Exodus, we are told, was in 2448, Libriat HaOlam, which means that the Exodus occurred 33, let me get that BCE out of here because it's not relevant. The Exodus occurred 3,333 years ago. Nice round number. Why is that important? Here we go. Our current year is 2021. If you take 3,333 years away from that, you get to 1321 BCE. Those dates in Egyptian land, that's really, really close when you're dealing with Egyptian dating. And as a matter of fact, you may be familiar, right, that the Jews weren't enslaved right away. They kind of roped them into it. The Midrash tells us that the Jews got roped into it. First, they had contests. Who can build more of these? Who can make more bricks, et cetera, et cetera. And then over time, they were able to enslave them. So an 8-year head start is not outrageous by any means. But again, within the ancient world and the dating of Egyptian dates, a spread of 8 years is like nothing. Furthermore, you should know that not everybody agrees on 1523. Some people have it at 1532. If it's 1532, this date is 1322. That's pretty much a dead match. So if you accept the dating, and again, there's some scholarly debate is exactly when it is, but if you make this 1532, then the 210 years of servitude are over in 1312, which remarkably is pretty darn, oh, sorry, I did the math bad again. This should be 1322. I apologize. Math, not my specialty. Okay, 210 years service ends in 1322. That's a dead match. From the end of the Hyksos reign to the Exodus from Egypt is 210 years, which is exactly what the rabbis tell us. Right, at the covenant between the pieces, Abraham is told your descendants will be enslaved for 400 years. When does that count start, say the rabbis? It starts from the birth of Isaac. Once the descendants start, so then the count starts. There's 190 years from the birth of Isaac until the Jewish people until they are enslaved, and another 210 years till they get out. So again, just to summarize, the Hyksos reign ended in 1532. A new king arose, not a Hyksos, and therefore he doesn't know Joseph, who was a Palestinian. Forgive the political term. Joseph was a Palestinian, right? He's from Palestine, and so were they. So they incorporate. This new king doesn't know who Joseph is. He starts his rule in 1532. In 1322, after 210 years of servitude, we have the exact date, it's the exact date of the Exodus. We don't have to mince words here with a couple of months. So what have we learned so far? We know that Joseph rises to power with the Hyksos during the time of the Hyksos. He is a natural for the Hyksos. Now, the Hyksos are referred to in the Exodus story as the Egyptians, as Mitzrayim. We will see that though they're referred to as Mitzrayim because they were ruling Egypt, what we know is that they're different than the rulers that came later. Okay. Let me stop for a second. I want to see if there are any questions or comments because we are doing a lot of stuff here. Hold on a second. Let me set it up so I can see everyone in case they have questions. Video. Here we go. Why can't I see everybody? There's Howard. I can't see him anyway, so I can see everybody. So if anybody has a question, throw your hand up. Otherwise, I'm ready to continue when you are. Okay. So let's keep going. The dates literally work perfectly. I'm sorry you couldn't ask for better dates, right? Again, a perfect, literally perfect correlation between how long the rabbis say the servitude was, even though the Torah doesn't say 210 years. But the rabbis say 210 years based on the covenant between the pieces, and it is literally 210 years from the end of the Hyksos reign to the Exodus from Egypt. Doesn't get better than that. It just doesn't. But there's so much more. Okay, fasten your seatbelts. I'm going to close a couple of, no, let me leave them open. Let's talk about the city of Tanis. And you'll say, what's Tanis? Oh, wrong place. Hold on. What happened to Tanis? Go back. There it is. All right, let's talk about Tanis. I'm going to screen share again. Oh, I am screen sharing, so that's not a problem. Okay, let's look on our map where Tanis is. Let's go to this map. You see this Zoan? That's actually pronounced Tsoan. Tsoan, as we're about to see from quoting the Bible, is where Moses went to perform his miracles, the plagues. That was the city he went to. That makes perfect sense because that was the seat of the pharaohs at that time. That's why he went to Tanis. Now, they were also, there's two cities, but they're right near each other. It's not particularly monumental, but that's where he went. Let me show you the verse. They did not remember his, enlarge. I have to change this view. Hold on, please. There we go. What's this? That'll do. Okay. They did not remember his strength on the day he redeemed them from their foe, how he displayed his signs in Egypt, his wonders in the plains of Tsoan. Tsoan is where whoever, which is now modern day Tanis, or at least, yeah, it's called Tanis. This is where all the good stuff went down. Moses went to see Pharaoh. He goes to see him by the river. Let's go back to our map for a second. Ancient Egypt map. Okay, here's Tanis. It's right on the river. You can see that it's right on the river. This is where Moses goes. Now, by the way, you see Avaris? Avaris was the seat of the Hyksos. It was a little bit south of there and closer to where the Jews were in Goshen. Let's leave that aside for the moment. So again, Tsoan is the place where it went down, and Tsoan and Tanis are the same place. Good. I want to take you back to an earlier verse that I mentioned just in passing. What did I do with it? Okay, I'm just going to refer back to it. I'm sorry. I've got so many windows open here. I don't know what to do with them. Unless it's right here. No. Okay, so Moses goes to Pharaoh and he performs these wonders in a place called Tanis. And you remember that we said before that God said that not only is he going to strike down the firstborn in Exodus 12. Let's see if I can find Exodus. I'm still trying to find Exodus 12, but I'm not finding it in my list of pages here. Oh, here it is. So God says, whenever, when God warns Pharaoh, Moses warns Pharaoh and about, when God says to Moses that he's going to kill the firstborn, he says, I'm also going to settle the score with Egypt's gods. Interesting verse. Do we have evidence for such a thing? So before we go any further, I want to point out that the seat of power in the 18th and 19th dynasty was not in Tsoan. This is going to get a little bit, for a moment here, you're just going to have to bear with me, but it wasn't in Tsoan. It was in a different place, which is like way down in here in a place called, let me see if I can remember what it was called. Tanis, give me a second. Here we go. Karnak. Place called Karnak. There are famous temples there. Okay, so the real seat of power was in Karnak. Now, the local authorities, the local state, if you will, there were different states in Egypt. So the local state, the seat of power there was in Tanis. Whoever the Jews were dealing with, whoever was enslaving them was in Tanis. But the seat of power was in Karnak. So basically, God's got to settle scores with two areas. He's got to settle scores with Tanis, and he's got to settle scores with Karnak. Fasten your seatbelt. See if I can get the volume up as high as I can. Okay, this is a video from a gentleman named Brian Forrester. He's an archaeologist. Some of this you're going to have to just bear with it. It's all worth it, I promise. It won't be much, about 5 minutes.
Now, this strange location is called Tanis,
This is the seat of power where Moses went.
Egypt.
This is where Moses went to whoever was in charge who was enslaving the Jews.
And for the last 2 hours, we drive through.
Remember, there's still Washington, D.C. is in Karnak. Moses went to Albany.
Farmland. So the question is why is Tanis seemingly devoid of life? And why is every sculpture and obelisk and pillar, etc., smashed to pieces? This is way beyond the damage of any marauding army or vandalism. This is cataclysmic destruction, and we're going to see lots of evidence of heat scorching on the surfaces of a lot of the stone. Now, most of the stone, which is located at Tanis, such as this, is granite, and it's likely that the granite came from the great quarry at Aswan, and Aswan is 1,000 kilometers to the south. So how was all of this transported?
No, that's not our question. Don't worry about that.
Again, notice
we're interested in heat
erosion
damage
of the surfaces. And the only piece that seems to have been intact is this quartzite box. The hieroglyphics were likely done by the dynastic Egyptians, but it's clear that the dynastic Egyptians found the site of Tanis in complete destruction, and so they decided to build there and recycle with what they found. Now again, is this erosion natural or normal, or could it be the result of intense blasts of heat? This gives you the visual. Again, you can see that Tanis is more or less devoid of life, except for the odd thorny bush, like the one you can see on the right here.
All right, let me just point something out because this is important. When you drive to Tanis from Cairo, which takes about 3.5 hours, the last hour you're driving through lush fields the whole way. This is the Nile Delta. But when you get to Tanis, this is what you find, a wasteland. Let's keep going.
And when you walk on the surface, it's not like you're walking in sand or on dirt, but more like flour, as if all of the nutrients was burnt out of the soil itself. And this gives you an idea of the sheer volume of stone found at Tanis. Again, likely from the Aswan granite quarry, 1,000 kilometers to the south.
All right, let's just point out that they've only dug up about 5% of the stone at Tanis. This is a massive site with massive statues. Now take a look at this.
Archaeologists tried to put this sculpture together, but it does look like some of the extensions of it, like the arms, were literally blown off. This fits in well with the theory of Dr. Robert Schoch regarding solar plasma striking the Earth 12,000 years ago.
Okay, yeah, we have God striking them. Just let it go.
You can see that the right-hand side of that statue has been hit with at least 2,000 degrees Celsius of heat.
2,000 degrees Celsius of heat. Want to tell me who can generate that much heat? 3,000 years ago? You don't have a lot of options. There are not a lot of choices.
Now, all of this stone was found by archaeologists in the 19th century underground. They had to dig down 10 to 20 feet in order to find Tanis. And here you can see that this wall section, in fact, was probably rebuilt by the dynastic Egyptians.
Dynastic Egyptians come after the Hyksos.
Possibly 2 or 3 or 4,000 years ago. And look at that slab of granite on the left where Irene is standing, massive. So this area may have been exposed during dynastic times, and they built that wall section. There are also an incredible number of obelisks and sections of obelisks located in Tanis, more than at any other location by far in Egypt.
All right, let's summarize what we have here. You have an utter wasteland filled with stones, many of which have been scorched, according to geologists. We'll listen to one of those geologists momentarily, by heat of at least 2,000 degrees centigrade. And you can see that the place was laid to waste, and in the middle of a fertile delta, there's just nothing left. This city was the worship city. This was the capital city in that district. This was the capital city of whoever was oppressing the Jewish people. And this is where Moses went to do his miracles. And in this spot, we have something which cannot be explained by natural means. Let's take a look at another video along the same lines. And remember, all these dates line up perfectly with the Exodus. She's going to be a little hard to hear in the beginning, but it's worth the ride. Hold on.
Patricia, was all this stuff found buried?
Yep, absolutely. They've moved it, lined it all up here. And you can look out here and you'll look at how the desert moves and all these lumps. Everything under there. This site is covered. We're probably only seeing 2%, if that, of what's underneath the sands. And as you walk around.
Okay, so there's a massive city there. It's a massive worship city. We know it was a temple. We know that there was a special pool there that they would bathe in. We know this was a holy site, completely destroyed. Now, the seat of power of the 18th and 19th dynasties was not in Tanis. That's where the local ruler was, Albany. This is Albany, so to speak. But Washington, D.C. was located in Karnak. I'm only going to show you one picture. See this guy? He had his head blown off. His face was blown off by heat. There are numerous statues in Karnak, which was the seat of power. This was the Washington, D.C. Numerous places in Karnak where there is evidence of heat scorching, again, in the thousands of degrees Celsius. This is the place where the ultimate rulers, the seat of power, was in Egypt. So when it says that God evened the score, we now know that God evened the score. What did he do? He literally blasted their holy places. He blasted their statues. He knocked down their gods. Look at this. This statue is, this is big. This is a big guy, and you can see his face is blown off. This is not erosion. Erosion doesn't do this. Geologists will tell you the only way to cause the discoloration and damage is intense heat. So what do we have? The Torah tells us that God got even with the Elohei Mitzrayim. And in fact, in the two seats of power of Egypt, we have clear evidence that God did just that. He basically blasted all their idols. And in the case of Tanis, I don't know what the story is in Karnak. In the case of Tanis, which is really where the oppressors lived, there's literally nothing left. Nothing can grow there. It's just destroyed. In the middle of a delta, there's just this destroyed place. Okay. Let's leave that aside. Okay. So what do we have? Let's stop share. What do we have? In conclusion, what do we have? The Jewish people did not live in any sort of metropolis or city. They lived in pastoral lands. They lived outside of the city. They couldn't live in the city or even in the same district as the city. They had to live in another part of Goshen because they were shepherds. And when the time came for the Jewish people to gather together, they all had to gather in one place because they had actually been living in a number of different areas in a region called Goshen, which was in the Nile Delta. They lived in a region. Why is any of this significant? Because once we know where they lived, we can plot from there where Joseph must have been. If he was going to be near his family, if Joseph was going to live near Goshen and he's in a seat of power, it's not hard to track where he is. And once you plug in the dates, it's pretty clear that Joseph was in the seat of power of the Hyksos, which was in Avaris, which is right near Goshen. Once the Hyksos are kicked out and the oppression begins, the seat of power moves to Tanis, the local seat of power, but the real seat of power is in Washington, D.C. It's all the way down in Karnak. And at the time of the Exodus, which times perfectly with the end of the Hyksos, 210 years later, at that time, all of a sudden, we find that the two seats of power with which God would have settled the score were destroyed in supernatural means. I just don't know what more you could ask for. Now, this explains a number of other phenomena, by the way. So one of the complaints of archaeologists is, why don't we have any records? Why don't we have any records of the plagues? This is also going to explain another thing. We're going to do two things at once here. I want to combine two things. How is it fair that all of Egypt suffered because the rulers of a particular place were oppressing the Jews? So there are various answers. What I would submit to you is that the plagues did not strike all of Egypt. The plagues struck where Egyptians lived in the land of Goshen, in the area of Goshen. Those Egyptians were struck because those Egyptians were responsible. The plagues did not strike everywhere. That was related to, what was the other point there? I'm sorry. Oh, so why are there no records? Well, it's very simple. The local seat of power, which was the Albany, right? Tanis, was leveled. You can't find any records because it was leveled. It's gone. All the records are gone. The capital city was destroyed. If you destroyed Albany, you wouldn't have any records, right? Right. If Washington, D.C. was destroyed, you wouldn't have a Library of Congress. So, of course, there are no records. There are no written records because they've all been destroyed because the whole city was destroyed. There is, however, clear evidence when you combine the Bible with the Hyksos and the 18th dynasty and the timing, there's clear evidence. And, of course, all of this scarring on the statues, God getting even, doing justice with those gods. It couldn't be more clear. It just couldn't be more clear. Let me just see if I had any other points. And again, I want to mention that this, again, also helps us with the story of Joseph. We understand now why it is that Joseph could rise to power so quickly in Egypt, because it wasn't Egyptians' Egypt. It was Hyksos' Egypt. And Joseph was from the same place as the Hyksos were. So they were very, very comfortable with him. It's also why he blended in so well to the point where the brothers couldn't recognize him amongst the Hyksos rulers because he looked like the rulers. He looked like all of them. So I had no idea he was anything but one of them. The really important point here is as follows. When you look at the evidence on the ground, in the very places where the Bible says it went down, the evidence is all there for cataclysmic destruction of the capital city, cataclysmic destruction of the gods. The timing is literally perfect. From the end of the reign of the Hyksos to the Exodus, 210 years, matches up exactly with the rabbinic counting. I don't know what more proof you could want. I'm sorry that there are no documents left, but they nuked. God nuked Tanis. There's just nothing left. You go there and you see there's nothing left. I just don't know what more evidence anyone could ask for. Questions, comments? Judge, first of all, let me unmute. Well, I'm not going to unmute everybody. We'll start with Judge, and I'll come back to you, Bob. Judge, you got a request to unmute? Thank you, Yocheved.
Yeah, is there any archaeological findings as to the approximate date of the scarring of the statues, of the heat?
No, because it's impossible to date it.
Okay.
You can't date something like that because carbon dating, there's no method.
So theoretically, we don't really know when that happened.
Oh, we do though, because we know when thank you for pointing this out. Forgot to mention this. We know that the city of Tanis was already completely abandoned no more than 10 years later, 12 years later, I believe. 10 or 12 years later, we know it was already abandoned. It doesn't say that it was abandoned 12 years later. It just said we know that by 12 years later, everything had moved out of Tanis.
This is what the archaeologists say?
100%.
Thank you.
Hold on one second, please. I'll be right with you to take your question, Bob.
Mute. Okay, I should be unmuted. Hello. Hello. Don't hear any. I don't hear the rabbi yet. Unmuted. No, it's silent. Uh-oh. What you looking at, Judge? Uh-oh. I'm still not speaking, so. Waiting for the rabbi. Uh-oh.
I didn't realize I was muted. That's the problem. Bob, I hear you just fine. Somehow I got muted. Don't ask how.
So obviously the Hyksos, you've spent a lot of time with them on it.
Yep.
Where'd they come from?
Palestine and Asia Minor.
Just so it was in a broad area.
Yeah, like the Levant and south of the Levant. Yeah.
Okay. Was there documents written for that?
100%. The Hyksos, no question where they came from. There are lots of documents. They ruled Egypt for over 100 years. There's no shortage of documentation about the Hyksos.
Okay. And so they...
I'm sorry. And we know where they were from because of the way they're depicted on tomb paintings. They're depicted as Palestinians. The tomb painters, the Egyptian tomb painters, had very, very strict rules about how to characterize people from different places. There were different signs to tell you where people were from based on the way that you drew them. We have ample evidence that the Hyksos, it's not a question.
So the Hyksos ended their rule, and for the next couple of 100 years, another group led what was happening in Egypt.
Yes, and this group is very fearful of the Hyksos and sees the Jews as the Israelites, the descendants of Joseph, as natural allies of the Hyksos, which is why they're worried about them in the first place.
Okay. So I'm just trying to understand in terms of documentation. So obviously that's where you always look for to substantiate any theories that you might have. So when they left that next 200 years, what were they like? Where were they? What they were fighting? Were they warlike against?
Who are we talking about? The Hyksos?
Yes.
So there's a debate as to whether they got driven out of Egypt or they signed a treaty and left Egypt, but they left. There's no question that they left.
Okay, so they did disappear.
They left and they disappeared, and we really don't hear from them again. They apparently get absorbed into other national entities in that area over time. But they really kind of disappear from the map after they leave Egypt. As far as I know, but there's no question that they were there, and there's pretty much no question exactly when they left. Within a couple of years, we know.
Because it's the next 200 years that are what matters to us.
210, yes.
210, yeah, on that. And that the documents are destroyed.
Well, all the documents from the reign of the Hyksos are gone. We have nothing. If you look up papyrus, which is what they wrote their documents on, if you look up papyrus and Tanis, you can't find anything.
Yes, so
there's like two, and they're in terrible shape, and they're clearly from a later age anyway. There's just no documentation because the place got nuked.
So what are the people who don't believe in the Bible say about this burning destruction?
They don't know about it. They don't know about it because mainstream archaeology doesn't want to deal with it. Mainstream archaeology does not want to deal with this stuff because it so upsets.
They can't
explain it. So what is mainstream academic archaeology when they can't explain something? What do? They ignore it.
Yeah.
That's what they do because they have to keep they have their dissertation and they have their doctorates and their PhDs and they have to go to conferences and they don't want to be wrong. So academic archaeology is very, very stuck science, unfortunately. They just don't deal with it. But I mean, the evidence is it's clear as day. You saw it.
Sure.
There's nothing to talk about. I don't know how any archaeologist explains the site.
Understood.
Other than what we would consider to be a supernatural destruction. There's just no other explanation. heat scarring of 2,000 degrees Celsius? There's nothing on Earth that could do that. I don't think there's anything on Earth that can do it now.
No. No.
These are cannons.
Very good.
All right. Folks, it has been a pleasure. I can't tell you how this class took on a life of its own. I see there are a couple of chat notices here, so I don't want to miss anyone. Give me a second here. Let me plug into chat. Is a meteor?
No impact.
The meteor
There's no
doesn't
impact.
work. The meteor, somebody suggested possibly the meteor, and I'm familiar with the meteor that fell on Russia 10 to 15 years ago. Sure, that's possible. It left a crater. It's not a crater there. And it would not have done to the ground what was done there. You'd have a giant crater if it was a meteor.
No, it wouldn't be that.
Take a look at the Russia site. It's a giant, any meteor that makes it all the way down of any size leaves a huge crater. So meteor would not work for me. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it has been a pleasure. And I look forward to seeing you again next Tuesday night. Where our Parsha next Tuesday night is Parshas Vayechi. Jacob blesses his children, and let me tell you, you and I don't want blessings like that. We're going to talk about Jacob's blessings because, wow, he really was angry with some of his kids.
Yeah.
So we'll see. All right, folks, we'll see you next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.